Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I have whizzing around in front of me today are, well, a Cyclops, a couple of Cyclopses. Somebody check me on the plural for that one. I'm sure it's Cyclopses, but at any rate, these guys are from the Reclaimed faction for Full Spectrum Dominance, which is a 6mm wargame, and I will pop a link in the description to where you can find out more about that because, man alive, the miniatures alone are fantastic, particularly the scenery, which is a really weird thing to compliment, but yeah, really worth checking out. I will make sure there's plenty for you to go and see. Now these fellas, I've tried to copy the air quotes official look for the Reclaimed. They are they're old robots that have AI cores put into them and then concrete armor layered over the top. So concrete robots, that is the coolest idea. And yeah, it was a really interesting challenge to paint these guys up for the first time. I thoroughly enjoyed it. There's actually not a lot of paints involved, and it's really simple. So, the paints for these will be listed in the description. Same as always, let's get cracking. Now, first thing worth mentioning, of course, is that I've got two miniatures in front of me. They are going to be painted in more or less exactly the same way. The only real difference is where some of these colors are going to end up. So, for the record, anything I do to this chap is also going to appear on this chap too. So I'll pop him aside for a second. Now, once I've gone ahead and got my dudes on their bases, they're all ready to paint, first thing to do is to prime them. And here I've used Ash Grey from the Army Painter. Now, you could now go ahead and apply something like Great Hall Grey or something, because the air quotes official artwork for these guys tends to have a slightly more brown finish than a pure grey. It's a slightly more natural looking sort of concrete finish. What I'm thinking and what I'm hoping is that when we come to wash these guys later, it's going to introduce a little bit of that, and I won't have to add a step here by painting it in a different color. I'm quite happy that the ash gray is going to work as our base coat. Otherwise, you could use something like Grey Seer from Citadel, or any medium to light gray will work perfectly well. Try not to get too hung up on the exact colors we're going to use. We're painting concrete robots. So the first thing I want to do is to introduce a fair bit of texture to these guys and lighten them up a little bit. What I have is some company grey and an old makeup brush here. These things are brilliant for a nice quick overbrush. They hold plenty of paint rather. And if you do want to dry brush a little bit more carefully, they also work quite well for that. As you can see, I'm not too fussed about what it hits or what it doesn't, because at the moment I just want to brighten up the concrete a little bit. If I do get that slightly streaky textured finish, all the better. That's actually kind of what I'm counting on here. I want a bit of life to this concrete. Now give that a little bit of time to dry and settle properly. What I'm going to do is grab a fresh brush, and I have here Brigade Grey. Now this one's just off-white. It's probably the one that is a little closer to Grey Seer. And what I'm going to do now is to stipple, instead of dry brushing, just jab at some of the areas that I want a little bit more texture, a slightly speckled finish to our concrete. Now this is something I probably wouldn't bother doing on the guys smaller than the Cyclops units, this fella here. So your workers and what have you, I would probably skip this. But for a few bits of extra detail on your slightly larger chunky boys, yeah, just concentrating in areas that you want a bit more depth. So now that we've got a bit of texture in what's going to be the majority of our concrete stuff, what I'm going to turn to now is some gunmetal, and we'll paint in, funnily enough, the metal bits. Now once again, try not to get too caught up in the correct color here. Lead belcher, plate mail metal, anything of the sort will work. I'm just looking for a middling sort of silvery color. So I'm going to try and get the undersuit and what have you. Well, it's not really an undersuit, is it? It's a frame. I keep forgetting how these guys are assembled. So these bits which look like part of the robot. Now I've seen these done in green, which looks pretty cool, but I like the idea that most of the under frame is going to be the same color. So A little bit of leeway here in how you want to paint your guys, of course. Now that'll take a little bit of doing, and some areas are going to be a wee bit tricky to reach with your brush, but try not to worry about it. Any bits that you do hit that you don't want to be silver, you can just go back to probably that Brigade grey and just tidy over the top of them later on. Now there aren't many parts on these guys which are white, but there are a couple. So I'm going to swap to matte white and base coat these in now. Now on the website and in the rulebook, all of the pictures of the Reclaimed have quite a vibrant green going on them. So what I have here, this is Eternal Hunt from the Army Painter. This is maybe a little bit brighter than Warp Lightning, but just covers so much better. You can use, of course, any green in this sort of vein. Something quite saturated will work nicely though, I think. And now for the red, we'll keep it nice and simple, and I'm going to use pure red here. So this goes on nice and quick. This might be the only one I need to actually come back and hit with a second coat, to be honest. But it will cover fairly nicely. I'm also going to get a smaller brush and dot in the little eye sections on these guys as well. Now after a couple of coats, man, that is a bright red. But for these big hammer style things, there might be one or two bits that you want to rough up a little. And what I mean there is I've painted the head of the, I guess, kind of fire axe thing. Painted that red, but here I have one of my patented scrunkly brushes, and I'm going to just jab at the edge here with some of the gunmetal from earlier. Just enough to make it look like the whole thing was red and has seen a bit of use. Now I'll move on and mix up our shade mix. Now this time what I'm going to use is Strong Skin Shade as the base of what we're going to make up, but I'm going to thin this down quite a bit with Speedpaint Medium, because if we use it neat, I'm going to get brownish reddish dudes. That's not really what I want. I want the shading effect, and I do want to introduce a little bit of warmth, but I don't want it to be too strong. So what I'm going to do, for every one drop of the skin shade, I'm going to do 2 parts of Speedpaint Medium. Now you could use good old Strong Tone. I love these bottle toppers. These come from Victoria Miniatures. They are 3D prints, but it's actually really handy to have a little white primed something where you can see the difference between those washes. As you can see, the Strong Tone is going to give us the shading, but it wouldn't give that little bit of life that I think the Strong Skin Shade is going to give us. You can use whatever you like. I'm going to put this one aside. Let's mix up our skin shade. I'll make sure that the text is correct earlier, but this is actually 3 parts Speedpaint Medium, not 2. And what we'll do is, once we've got it all mixed up, just apply it over everything. You'll see we get a little bit of warmth here, and it's not going to completely dull down the color, but nice shading, and like I said, a little bit of life and warmth here. So I'm going to take my time, bop this over everything. So over the red, over the metal stuff, everything is everything. Then once that's dried, you'll see what I mean about having brought down that grey to something a little bit more natural looking. It does give it a bit of warmth, which, yeah, saves a lot of time. There's 1 or 2 bits where I think I am going to come in with here some Strong Tone. Now this is mixed down half and half with Speedpaint Medium. And what I'll do is just pick a few of the areas where I want a little bit more pronounced shading and just dot this in fairly messily, to be honest. I don't need to be careful with this. Now this stage is purely optional. I think it will work quite well, particularly for the red here. A little bit more depth in my shading is not going to be a bad thing. Now we're cooking. Now I have also, let's flip them around quickly, I've gone over the metal with a little bit of that mix as well. You don't have to, but I do think that increasing the contrast there is going to help with that metal work. What I'm going to do now is just a couple of highlights. I've thinned down some pure red, get some fresh stuff, maybe half and half water and paint. You want it to be relatively thin here. What I'll do now is just a little bit of this over some of the flat areas of the axe, I guess this is. And then to actually highlight it, you could probably skip that interim step if you wanted to, especially on your smaller figures. But I have here angelic red, and I'm just going to pop a little bit of this very carefully along some of the sharper edges here, where I want a little bit more detail to stand out. And then for the green, what I have is ferocious green, which is really fun to say. I've thinned this down probably a little bit more than I would need to. Reason being is I want to have a little bit of a play with it while it's still fairly fluid. So if I make a mistake, I can quickly swipe it off with my finger. But no, happy enough. That looks about right. This is kind of like, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's like Nurgling green, but maybe a little bit more saturated, a little bit more pleasant. I know there's the Dark Elder green set. You know, you got Sybarite green, and then there's one a bit lighter, which is like this. It's a nice minty green. Oh, goodness me. Look at me. I'm waffling. And then just showing you on this guy here, if you've got any white bits that you want to tidy up, well, a little bit of white here will not go amiss. Just grab some fresh stuff and pop along the edges there to brighten that up. Now, while I had the white out, I think you can see I did start edge highlighting some of the grey. It will look super cool, but as I got about halfway through doing this fella, I realized, what on God's earth am I doing? That's going to be a lot of work. I would recommend maybe for your larger figures like the centaurs, you'll probably have one or two of those in your army as like a center point. For your basic infantry, certainly don't bother. Don't do that to yourself. Though, I think we can see it will look cool. So your choice about how much time you want to spend there. I have decided to back off. What I am going to do now, though, before I highlight the metalwork, is actually take these guys outside and hit them with a matte varnish. So after a varnish, any shininess that results from the wash is going to be dealt with. Remember that varnishing your miniatures is often about more than just protecting them. It has a lot to do with the finish. But at this stage, what I will do is to highlight the metal, because doing this after the varnish, it gets to keep that little bit of a gleam. Now what I have here, this is steel from the Vallejo model airline. And man, this is bright. I really love this as like a proper ding sort of highlight for metal stuff. So a little bit of this is going to go a long way. And what I would suggest too is for our mounted up axe here, is just to catch a few short scrapey lines, and that'll do the job just fine. So yeah, I'm now going to go ahead and highlight the metalwork. As much of this as I want to do, the bars, yeah, are going to look good, I think. Just catch them with the edge of your brush. Okay, now these guys are ready for their base. Now, quick note on this. What I'm thinking is I want to try and avoid adding any sense of scale to the base. Because obviously I want to be able to play full spectrum dominance, but these guys are also going to be pulling double duty in games like Stargrave or 5 Parsecs. So for full spectrum dominance, they're giant robots. If I put them next to 6mm troops, they're going to look really tall. If I put them next to a 28mm figure, they're instead just going to look like big chunky robots. So the recipe for the basing will be in the description. It's going to be extremely simple, but I think it's going to set these guys off quite nicely. So let's go ahead and finish that and get a look at these guys once they are all finished. And so there at last, our reclaimed Cyclopses are complete. And I do say this for pretty much everything that shows up on the channel, but I really enjoyed painting these guys. The challenge of trying to recreate something from sight alone, that's kind of new. Concrete robots I've never done before, funnily enough. So just eyeballing somebody else's work and giving that a shot, I enjoyed that. That was an interesting challenge. I also really like the finished result. I think they're going to look great with an army of these guys, and certainly standing up against, like I said, some Stargrave stuff. They'll look the business. I'm quite happy with that. So as always, thanks goes out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, and importantly resin this time as well, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.